Welcome back to the Field Service Leaders podcast, where we spotlight innovators and leaders and we redefine how work gets done. I'm your host, Alistair Clifford Jones, and today we're going to dig into the world of field service, an industry which is really undergoing a huge amount of transformation. Today, I'm talking to Josh Zolin, CEO of Windy City Equipment Services. He's also the best-selling author of a book called Blue is the New White. He's a champion for skilled trades. He tries to redefine what trades are about. And I found this discussion really fascinating, and it's a different angle on field service. His business, Windy City Equipment Services, has grown fairly rapidly from two people, himself and his father, that now employs over 65 engineers across three different cities. So let's see what we've got to say. Hi, Josh. Can you just give me maybe a quick overview of your career and how you ended up in service management?
Sure. It doesn't sound like a loaded question, but to some it is. How far back would you like me to go?
Wherever you think would be interesting.
All right. Well, I'll give you the drive-by version then. So this was not the original family business. The original family business I was in is a stunt man. I was a stunt man my entire life. My mom was a stunt woman. My uncles were stunt men. My grandfather was one of the first stunt men. My dad was a stunt man. And for my entire upbringing, I thought that was the path I was going to follow. And it is the path that I followed after high school. I was very vocal about not going to college because I was going to be a stunt man, right? To the dismay of my counselors and teachers and every educator I've ever encountered. And so once I turned 18, I moved out to Hollywood. I was living in Kenosha, Wisconsin at the time. That's kind of where I grew up, believe it or not, in the Midwest there. And so I moved out to Hollywood, California. I pursued the stunt industry as my family name would permit, and quickly found out it's not what I wanted to do the rest of my life. The problem was I didn't know what I wanted to do the rest of my life. So uh, kind of simultaneously, my dad, even though he was a stuntman, had gotten out of the business and became a foreman for a bakery in Chicago. When I moved out, actually a year before I moved out to Hollywood, he moved out to Phoenix, Arizona, to fix restaurant equipment. He wanted to start his own business. And so when I got tired of doing stunts, I called him up and I said, Dad, I have no idea what you do for a living, but I know I don't want to see you turning wrenches for your entire life. And so I want to come out, and I know there's opportunity there, and I want to work with you, and I want to grow the business. Um, and that's how I got into this trade.
Were there any major challenges you had to overcome doing that kind of switch from, because they're kind of slightly diverse industries you've been in?
Yeah, I tell people often that it feels like I've lived a couple of different lives because they were so different, and then I kind of bridge that by saying I went from getting lit on fire to fixing things that produce fire. So, you know, um, the challenges were countless. I first had to come to terms with myself. Listen, I'll be transparent with you. When I was a stuntman, that was my identity. That's what set me apart. That's what made me who I was. All through high school, I didn't know another stuntman. Nobody in my high school knew another stuntman. That's what made me cool, and so I think the biggest challenge for me was stepping out of the only thing I've ever known into the complete and utter unknown. So that was the biggest challenge. The other challenge was, listen, life in Hollywood is a little bit different than life in Phoenix, Arizona. I was at that age, I was up all night, and I slept in, and I was a typical 21-year old in Los Angeles. And so when I got into this industry, listen, my dad is very old school. There's no riding coattails. There's no silver spoons. There's no any of that. And so it was early mornings, getting up at 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning, learning how to be a service technician, turning the wrenches, fixing the equipment, dealing with the customers until, you know, 8, 9 o'clock at night, and he wasn't paying me a ton. Again, he's old school. I had to work my way up, so I had to have a second job delivering pizzas from like 9 o'clock at night to midnight, and then I got up and did it all over again day after day. So the physical challenges were there for me as well.
So, was there anyone, probably apart from your father, that you think's influenced you or given you a bit of advice that you could pass on to other people? It may well be your father as well, actually. So,
You know what? It's a really good question. There have been several people in and out of my life that have helped me, in my journey. My grandfather, who had recently passed away last year, he was 94 years old. 94-year-old stuntman. Most stuntmen don't make it to,
wow.
to a fraction of that, right? And but he lived a long, storied life. He taught me a lot about challenge and adversity, and if somebody was yelling at you, they're probably trying to teach you something. And so he had a big influence on me. My dad, obviously, he gave me this opportunity that ultimately blossomed into success that I could never have imagined. Right? He was also the best man at my wedding. So my dad and I are very close. I've had coaches over the years. My business coach Al, he and I meet on a monthly basis, and go over P&Ls and challenges and struggles within the organization. Before I knew how to run a business, I was fixing equipment, so I had to learn all of this, being able to build a business from people, and that was where I learned best. So there's been several people along the way that have helped me with that. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention my wife too, who has been through the thick and the thin with me. Right, when I was out there as a service technician, I was getting all greasy, right, from head to toe, because that's what we did. We fixed fryers and ovens, and
Mhm.
rolling around in grease every day. I went through probably 3 dryers when I was a service technician, because the grease would always ruin the dryer. We would wash my clothes, but then there was so much grease. So she endured all of that with me up through where we are today, and so I'm blessed for all those people that I've had, but every one of them has influenced me in one way.
With all those influences, you've grown a pretty successful business. What do you think the key aspects have made it successful?
This is a good question, and I want to make sure that I answer it authentically, because I feel like this question has the ability to fall into a trap of like checking boxes of what all the self-help books say and what all the business books say. you know so I want to reflect a little bit, and I think I would say the biggest contributor to the success of the organization. And to put it into perspective, we started with just me and my dad working out of his garage. We went from us to 5 technicians to 10 technicians. Opened a branch in Tucson, Arizona, then Houston, Texas, then Albuquerque, New Mexico, and eventually, I think we're at about 65 employees now, 3 physical locations, and we've been on the Inc. 5000 list of fastest growing companies in America 3 times in a row, 18, 19, and 20. And I think the biggest thing in all of that was consistency. I say that because, especially in this day and age, I think entrepreneurs have a tendency to do something until it doesn't work. And then they drop it, and then they try something else, and then that doesn't work. And then they drop it and they try something else, and then that doesn't work, until they find something that hopefully works. My philosophy is different. I try something until it works. So I let it fail 1,000 times, 1,000,000 times, sometimes to my detriment, you know, until I figure out a way to make that one thing work. And that's what I've done here. I have forged ahead with my team, and we have failed countless times. And every single time we ask ourselves, what did we learn? And we take what we learned and we implement it, and then hopefully we'll surpass the point that we failed at last time.
So do you, there's a lot of talk about emerging technologies. How important do you think they are to a service business and your business?
Wildly important. So, one of the advantages I've always had when growing the business is my age. I did started doing this when I was young, relatively young. I wasn't like
Hmm.
doing it in my teen years, right? But I was a technician for 10 years. After in my 20s, and then I quickly took the reins and grew the business. And what came with that was my ability to use and implement modern day technology that I was used to, my generation was used to. So we've always been a little bit ahead of the curve in that aspect. But now we're at this crossroads, right? We're at a almost what I would consider a revolution with AI and ChatGPT and all this kind of stuff. I will say this: in the trades, in the service business, blue collar mechanics, whatever, AI is not going to replace our jobs. AI is not going to, climb the ladder and fix the equipment. AI is not going to, get the widget up and running, and it won't do that. But what it will do is it will supplement any and all of our support and diagnostic aspects that we use. So, all we have to do is rely on our physical ability to fix this equipment, replace the parts, things like that. But what that's going to do is it's going to create a divide between the companies that have the resources to implement this technology and the companies who don't.
Hmm.
As you know, there's a roll up happening in the industry right now where some of the bigger companies are gobbling up some of the smaller companies. And I think that gap is going to widen. And as the bigger companies deploy their resources to implement this new technology in artificial intelligence, that it's going to be able to do things faster, better, and more efficiently than the smaller companies can do them with manual labor and human imposition. So I feel like that is going to play a big part sooner rather than later, a lot sooner than people think.
Is it scary or exciting?
Depends on depends on which side of the scale you fall on. I think so. I've been accused of being a toxic optimist. Um, and so I
Okay.
always in any situation I try to look at the bright side of things. Doesn't mean I can't balance with realism. It doesn't mean that I'm short-sighted in that manner. It just means that I truly believe that there's good in everything, almost everything. And so I think that for me, this is exciting because I don't remember who said it. I'm not going to take credit for this, but somebody said recently to me, we're on the verge of being able to automate the ordinary so we can humanize the extraordinary. And I think that's really exciting because as soon as we're able to um, not worry about the mundane, the routine, the day to day, the tasks that bog down our time and steal our energy, then we can put that same time and energy into creating and building relationships and truly doing what it is that makes us human, and in turn what forges those relationships between a service company and our customer.
So, have you seen a big change in customer expectations
Yes.
since? Mhm.
It's actually since the emergence of the CMMS platforms, right? The platforms that help with work order management and things like that. The We're seeing more and more of these. I think the last time I counted, there were somewhere around 473 of them today. There's probably a Big Ten type of thing, but there are a lot of them popping up. And what that has done in this industry is it's done a couple of things. Number one, it's almost instantaneous. I don't know the word instantaneous. It's made it's made it so this information can transfer seamlessly in a matter of seconds. Time was when we were actually when I started, we would leave a carbon copy of the invoice with the customer, had all the information on it, parts, description. Sometimes we would mail them the final invoice. Then it turned to email. We would email them the final invoice, right? And that's still kind of being used today in a lot of areas. But now we have these platforms that organize all of the assets for the customer and then deploy to vendors like me, these work orders. And we're
Mhm.
expected to put all the information for these work orders in these CMMS platforms so it can be instantly seen by whoever's on the other end. And so the expectation for communication has risen tenfold, probably just in the last 5 years.
Mhm. And I guess all that expectation in terms of communication is about the process, isn't it? You still have got the human touch at the end. You've still got the engineer at the end. How do you keep your team motivated?
That's a good question too. I think that's one. I think that's one of the areas where we're all asking as leaders: how do we continually keep our teams motivated? And there's a couple of things here, without sounding like a self-help book myself, but I think it's important, number one, to stand for something as an organization, and I mean, call it mission, vision, purpose, values, whatever you want. You've gotta paint a picture of why you exist, because that's the only reason why people are going to continue to work for you, right? You can only buy your talent for so long. At some point, you have to provide a platform for them to want to work and grow. And then the second, I think, is I use the acronym WIFM. It's what's in it for me, right? So it's one thing to create a purpose or a reason that the business exists and have people a part of that, but then you also have to bridge that with, how do they benefit? How do they succeed? What is the end game not only for the business, but what does it mean for them? Right? Is it more money? Is it ability to transfer between branches? Is it, more personal than that? I like to get as personal as possible. What are your goals? How do you define success? That's a big one that I ask too, not only in my organization, but on my podcast. It's, you know, everybody defines success differently. And if you can understand why your team or how every person on your team defines success, then your job as a leader becomes guiding each and every one of those people toward whatever that definition is, whether that's putting them in a position, that suits it, or whether that's growing the company to a point that can support it, or whether that's just sitting down and talking with them once a week about how they can save more money and, buy a house or go on this vacation or, whatever it may be. So I think it's that personal touch, what's in it for them, and actually having a purpose for owning a business.
Now, not only growing a successful business, Josh, but you've also written a book. I'd be
Yes,
interested
sir.
to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I appreciate you asking. The book is called "Blue is the New White: The Best Path to Success That Nobody Told You About Until Now." And truly, what it is a resource for kids, usually high school age kids, right, to help them understand that there's another path to success aside from formal education, such as college, right, or university, whatever. It's not go to college or live on the streets. Which is often the
Yep.
narrative that we're told, right? This is the narrative I was told when I was in high school, except mine was, I was going to be a stuntman. I wasn't going to be, a technician. But I as I started to grow the business, as I started to understand what kind of opportunities and benefits exist in this industry, not only as a business owner but as a technician, right, coming up in the industry, it was amazing to me that there wasn't a single resource out there that I could find in written form, like a book, that actually spelled this out. I mean, if you dig deep, you could find articles and things like that about how, technicians can get paid, a good wage, but nothing really talked about, the other benefits, being able to actually find fulfillment or live your version of success or travel the world as a
Mm.
tradesperson, make good money, have benefits, take care of your family, you know, even the narrative of skilled tradespeople is that they're hard workers, and they are, and that is absolutely a fundamental driver of success, but once you understand that the value of a skilled worker is in their mind more so than even in their hands, you can take that and you can morph that into such an incredible career even after you're done working with your hands. So there's just so many opportunities. And truth be told, I was complaining about this one night to my wife, and I was like, there's just nothing out there. There's no book I can pass on or give to these people. And so she was like, well, why don't you just shut up and write one? And and uh, and that's kind of how it was born, and it's been an incredible success. We've gotten it adopted into several high schools across the country, and it reads really as a resource, as somebody who's in the corner of these kids, and I use questionable language in the book and stuff like that strategically because I don't want it to feel like a homework assignment,
Mm.
but I want it to have enough credibility to where an influencer like a teacher or a counselor can hand it to a student and say, here, have you ever considered something like this?
It's interesting, isn't it? Because the one thing our industry is lacking is people going into it. It's sort of, it's that whole kind of apprenticeship that we have in the UK and all of that sort of thing. So, no, that's really good. So, for you, Josh, the next 24 months, what goals have you got? Either personally or for the business or.
So the next 24 months. I'm going to continue to grow my organization, and I tell everybody the same thing. I grow it for the people who help me grow it, and that's held true ever since we started bringing on employees, and it's been a hell of a ride. It's been a lot of fun, and we have more to do, and honestly, it's exciting. One of the ways I define success is laying my head on the pillow at night and feeling like I accomplished something bigger than myself. And when we talk about an organization that supports so many people, that's something bigger than me. And I'm grateful to be part of it, and grateful to be, steering the ship, as they say, and having the team come along with me. And I want to make sure that the business grows to a point where it can support all of them and more. So there's definitely that. Speaking of the book, Blue is the New White morphed into a podcast, that I have now, and that subsequently turned into an academy, an online self-paced learning academy, as a that we offer to employers in the blue collar space, right, as an employee development tool for their teams. So we teach things like soft skills, leadership, communication, initiative, conflict resolution, getting along with others, the ability to work as a team, along with financial acumen, walking that line between, what does the frontline what do the frontline team members need to know that impact the bottom line of the organization? Because at the end of the day, the bottom line of the organization is how they succeed, right? That's how the business
Mhm.
grows. That's how they get their raises, their benefits, their opportunities, all of that. So how can we tie, their actions every day to the impact it has on that bottom line? And so, we've rolled this out just recently, beginning of the year, and it's been a huge success. It's beloved now by technicians across the industry, owners across the industry. So, over the next 24 months, we really want to expand on that, adding more and more soft skills, more and more, operational training, sales training, customer support training, all of the things that, we wish our team did better. And quite frankly, the things that these people aren't often taught unless they're being considered for leadership, management, or executive style positions. One thing that I say is, what would your company look like if every single employee was your best employee? Sounds aspirational, but it's possible.
It's an interesting thought that. Um, what's the most unusual challenge, just as we finally sort of relax, that you've come across in field service? I'm not going to talk about as a stuntman because that's probably much more interesting than field service, but that you've encountered.
Unusual. That is a good question. I'm going to go Elon Musk and think about that for 4.5 seconds before I answer it. I would say, okay, here's the unusual challenge. And it kind of ties together everything that we've been talking about the skilled trades and the people and development. I find that the people in these industries are wildly intelligent, are unbelievably talented, but often have a very poor self image. They were pushed into these professions because they were told they weren't smart enough to go to college. And it's created a dynamic where it's really hard to find somebody with the character and the skills to match because they've been moving through life telling them this story that they weren't enough to do something else. They are the ones that, they've gotten the looks when they say, well, I didn't go to college, I'm a plumber. I went to trade school or I did an apprenticeship or whatever. Finally, this narrative is starting to change, but I'm seeing the result every day in my organization when we bring people on. It is very difficult to add to the culture that we've created when people have self-deprecating behaviors and posturing, and defense mechanisms that they've developed over the years as a result of them just not feeling like, they were successful or could ever be. And so that has created a very unusual dynamic in finding and retaining talent, and really convincing the team that they have a valuable service to provide and that success is well within their reach.
So finally, if you had a magic wand and you could solve one challenge in service or in the business, what would it be?
I guess if I had a magic wand, I would wave it and hope that it would get people to see that these industries and working in these industries, whether it's as a technician, an owner, parts distributor, dispatcher, estimator, whatever, project manager, uh, that these positions and these careers are to be regarded in the same way that we regard doctors, lawyers, accountants, stockbrokers, these coveted white collar positions. Because at the end of the day, this is something I tell people too, is we're bringing in and bringing up a generation who notably wants to change the world. Yet we struggle to introduce them to the industries that actually change it, actually build it, actually construct it, right? And so, from a practical standpoint, if I could wave a magic wand and get everybody to see that working with your hands shapes the world as we see it today, that's probably what I would do.
Well, Josh, I found the last 30 minutes pretty inspiring, and I think if I lived on the other side of the pond, I wouldn't mind being one of your technicians, actually, or working with you, because it's been fascinating. Thanks very much for your time, Josh.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate you.
Okay.